Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the people you grew up with, the people who shared your blood, your childhood home, your family dinner table, had looked at everything you sacrificed and decided it meant nothing. Imagine spending years of your life caring for a sick parent, giving up your own comfort, your own plans, your own future, only to stand at the front door of the home you had lived in and worked in and poured yourself into, and hear the lock click from the inside. Not from a stranger. From your own sisters. Imagine standing on that porch with one small bag over your shoulder, listening to the silence on the other side of that door, and realizing that the people who were supposed to love you had just chosen greed over everything you ever meant to them. That is not a scene from a movie. That is exactly what happened to Olivia Carson on a warm Atlanta night in February 2020. And what happened after that, what her sisters never saw coming, what the streets of Atlanta could not break, what a sealed document locked in a forgotten file cabinet was quietly waiting to reveal, is the kind of story that will make you question everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and the price of betrayal. This is Olivia's story. And I promise you, every single word of it matters. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from right now. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, please hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Now let us go all the way back to the beginning, because to understand what Olivia lost, you first have to understand what she built, and what she gave, and who she was before any of this happened to her. Olivia Carson grew up in a yellow house on the south side of Atlanta, Georgia. It sat on a quiet residential street where the oak trees were old enough to arch over the road and touch each other on the other side, making a kind of natural canopy that turned gold every October. The house was not large. It had 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window that faced the backyard, a living room with carpet that had been there since the 1980s, and a front porch with 2 wooden chairs where her father liked to sit in the evenings with a glass of sweet tea and watch the neighborhood settle into night. It was a modest house. But it was a full one. Full of gospel music on Saturday mornings that her mother played from a small radio on the kitchen counter. Full of the smell of Sunday dinners, collard greens and cornbread and something slow cooking in a pot that you could smell from the driveway before you even got to the front door. Full of the sound of 3 girls growing up together, arguing and laughing and borrowing each other's things and fighting over the bathroom and falling asleep on the same couch during late-night movies. It was, for a long time, a happy house. And the man at the center of all of it was James Carson. James Carson was the kind of father who did not say much but meant everything he said. He had worked as a delivery truck driver for a logistics company in the Atlanta metro area for 27 years. He woke up before 4 every morning. He wore the same style of work boots for decades. He ate the lunch his wife packed him and came home in the evenings tired but present at the dinner table, present at school events, present on Sunday mornings in the 3rd pew from the front at their church on Campbellton Road. He was not a demonstrative man in the way that some fathers are. He did not give long speeches or make grand gestures. But he was steady in the way that matters most, the kind of steady that children feel in their bones even when they cannot articulate it, the kind that tells you the ground beneath your feet is solid and will not shift. He called that steadiness the foundation. He told his daughters more than once, at that dinner table, in that living room with the old carpet, that the foundation was the most important thing a person could build. He meant it about the money he was quietly saving year after year. But he also meant it about something deeper. About character. About showing up. About being the kind of person who does what needs to be done even when no one is watching and no one is applauding and the work is hard and the hours are long and the reward is nowhere in sight. Olivia understood that. From the time she was a little girl, she understood it in a way that her sisters never quite did. She was the oldest of 3. Olivia, then Sandra, 2 years younger, quick and stylish and always aware of the impression she was making on every room she entered. And then Tanya, the youngest by 5 years, softer in her presentation but with a quiet, watchful quality that Olivia noticed even in childhood. The 3 girls were different in the way that sisters often are, shaped by the same home but pulled in different directions by their own natures. Olivia was the one who stayed close. She was not the most glamorous. She was not the loudest or the most ambitious in the conventional sense. But she was the one who noticed when something needed doing and did it without being asked. She was the one who helped her mother in the kitchen without being told. She was the one who checked on her father when he was quiet for too long. She was the one who remembered things, who remembered that her mother liked her coffee with exactly 1 sugar, who remembered that her father's back hurt more on rainy days and that he would not admit it, who remembered birthdays and appointments and the small, specific details of the people she loved. That quality, that attentiveness, that quiet faithfulness, was the thing that defined Olivia Carson. And it was the thing that, years later, her sisters would try to use against her. Their mother, Louise Carson, passed away in the spring of 2014. She was 61 years old. An aneurysm, sudden and without warning, on a Thursday afternoon while she was folding laundry in the bedroom. Olivia was the one who got the call. She was 38 at the time, working as an administrative manager at a dental practice on Piedmont Avenue, living in a small but comfortable apartment in East Atlanta. She drove to the hospital, identified her mother, called her sisters, called her father, and then sat in a hospital corridor for 3 hours making sure everyone else had what they needed before she allowed herself to cry. That was Olivia. Even in the worst moments, she was taking care of something. Even in grief, she was thinking about the people around her. Sandra flew in from Savannah, where she had built a career in real estate, and cried loudly and publicly and left after 8 days saying she had a closing she could not miss. Tanya drove up from Charlotte, stayed for a long weekend, talked constantly about how devastating it all was, and then disappeared again into her own life. Olivia stayed. She helped her father sort through her mother's things. She helped him figure out how to cook for himself for the first time in 40 years. She drove him to church on Sundays. She called him every day. She showed up every week. She did not think of it as a sacrifice. She thought of it as love. James Carson carried the grief of losing Louise quietly, the way he carried everything. He kept working for 2 more years after her death, and then he retired, a small, understated retirement, no party, no fanfare, just a Friday afternoon where he clocked out for the last time and drove himself home and sat in those 2 wooden chairs on the front porch alone for a long time. Olivia came over that evening and sat with him. They did not talk much. The oak trees were doing their October thing with the light, and the street was quiet, and after a while James Carson said, "I did not think it would feel like this." Olivia asked what he meant. He said, "Stopping. I did not think stopping would feel so much like falling." She reached over and put her hand on his and left it there. He nodded once. They sat there until it got dark. That was the kind of relationship they had, not built on words, but on presence. On the willingness to simply be there. In the winter of 2017, James Carson was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He was 68 years old. The diagnosis did not come as a complete shock. There had been signs for a year or more. A tremor in his right hand that he had explained away as tiredness. A slight unevenness in his walk that he had blamed on an old knee injury. Moments of confusion that came and went quickly enough that it was easy to dismiss them as distraction. But when the neurologist at Emory Healthcare sat across from him and said the word out loud, something settled into the room that could not be unsettled. James Carson listened, asked 2 careful questions, and then was quiet on the drive home. Olivia drove him. She was always the one who drove him. She pulled into the driveway of the yellow house and turned off the engine, and they sat in the car for a moment without speaking. Then James said, "Well, now I know what I am dealing with." And Olivia said, "You are not dealing with it alone." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he got out of the car and went inside. And that was that. No drama. No extended conversation. Just an understanding between a father and a daughter that had been building for years and did not need to be stated to be absolutely real. Within 18 months of the diagnosis, the Parkinson's had settled into James Carson's daily life in ways that could not be managed from 15 minutes away. The tremors were more frequent. His medication schedule was complex and needed careful monitoring. There were mornings when the confusion was significant enough that he could not safely be alone. There were nights when he woke disoriented and frightened, and on those nights, someone needed to be there. Olivia made the decision quietly and without drama. She gave up her apartment in East Atlanta. She moved into the yellow house on the south side of Atlanta. She reduced her hours at the dental practice to part-time, enough to keep her income, not enough to keep her from being present when her father needed her. She set up a system for his medications with color-coded trays and phone alarms. She learned to communicate with his medical team. She drove him to his appointments at Emory, sat with him through every consultation, took notes, asked the questions he forgot to ask, and made sure the answers were written down in a notebook she kept on the kitchen counter so nothing was lost. Sandra called from Savannah every few weeks. The conversations were warm on the surface and brief in substance. She asked how Dad was doing, said she wished she could be there more, mentioned how busy the market was, and ended the call with promises to visit soon. Tanya called from Charlotte about once a month. She was always in the middle of something, a meeting, a dinner, an errand. The calls were 5 minutes long and full of good intentions that rarely materialized into anything concrete. She sent money twice, which Olivia used for her father's prescriptions without saying anything about it to either sister. She was not keeping score. She genuinely was not. She was not building a case or documenting a betrayal. She was simply doing what needed doing, day after day, because it was her father, and because she loved him, and because she was Olivia. In the summer of 2019, on a Tuesday afternoon when the Atlanta heat was pressing down on everything and the window unit in the living room was working harder than it had in years, James Carson called Olivia in from the kitchen and asked her to sit down. He was having a good day, his hands were steadier than usual, his eyes were clear, and the particular quality of his attention was sharp in the way it sometimes was on the good days, the days when the disease seemed to step back and give him a little room. Olivia came in and sat across from him in the armchair. He was in his regular chair, the one he had owned for 30 years, worn smooth on the armrests, perfectly shaped to the particular way he sat. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "I went to see Walter last week." Olivia knew who Walter was, Walter Gaines, the family's estate attorney, a quiet and meticulous man who had an office on Cascade Road in southwest Atlanta and who had been handling James Carson's legal affairs for more than 20 years. Olivia said, "What for?" James said, "I updated my will." She started to say something, and he held up one hand, slowly, because of the tremor, but with unmistakable intention. He said, "Let me finish." He told her everything. He told her that he had been thinking about it for a long time, and that he had made his decision with a clear head and a full heart. He said the house was hers. The savings account was hers. The investment portfolio he had been quietly building for 15 years, modest but real, the product of 30 years of before 4 a.m. workdays, was hers. He said that Sandra and Tanya would each receive a portion, enough to be meaningful, but that the primary estate was Olivia's. And then he said the thing she would carry for the rest of her life. He said, "I have watched you, Olivia. Every day for the last 2 years, I have watched you. And before that too, long before that. You are the one who showed up. Not because anyone asked you to. Not because you expected anything from it. But because that is who you are. And I want what I built to go to the one who knows what it means to build something." His voice was steady when he said it. His eyes were clear. He meant every word with the full weight of a man who had spent his entire life meaning what he said. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. She told him it was not about the money. He said, "I know that. That is exactly why it is yours." She did not tell Sandra. She did not tell Tanya. It did not feel like her place to announce it, like she was holding something over them, or measuring herself against them. She trusted her father. She trusted Walter Gaines. She trusted that when the time came, the document would speak for itself. That trust was the most beautiful and the most painful thing about Olivia Carson. Beautiful because it came from a genuinely good heart. Painful because it left her completely without armor for what was already being planned. Because while Olivia was sitting in that living room listening to her father tell her she was seen and valued and provided for, something else was happening. Something that had started months earlier, in quiet phone calls between Savannah and Charlotte that Olivia was not part of. Sandra had been doing research. She had spoken to an attorney, not Walter Gaines, but a different one, a man named Preston Howard who operated a practice in Buckhead and who specialized in estate restructuring. She had asked questions about wills, about probate, about the legal windows that opened when a person with a degenerative neurological condition updated legal documents. She had been thorough. She had been patient. And she had said nothing to Olivia, because the plan only worked if Olivia did not know. James Carson's health declined significantly in the fall of 2019. The good days became less frequent. The confusion deepened. There were weeks where he barely left the bedroom. Olivia was there through all of it, every difficult morning, every long night, every moment when the man who had been her foundation was struggling to hold his own shape. She held his hand. She read to him from the Bible he kept on his nightstand, the same Bible, worn soft at the spine, that he had carried to church on Campbellton Road for 40 years. She played his gospel music from a small speaker on the dresser. She made sure he was never alone when the fear came. And somewhere in those final months, between the medication schedules and the medical appointments and the long, quiet nights, Sandra flew to Atlanta twice. Both times, she said she was coming to see her father. Both times, she spent time alone with him in his room. Olivia thought nothing of it. She was grateful her sister was there. She stepped out to give them privacy. She made food and left it in the kitchen. She was, as she had always been, thinking about everyone but herself. What she did not know was that during those visits, Sandra had brought documents. Legal documents. Prepared by Preston Howard in Buckhead. Documents that, in the language of estate law, represented a new will, one that divided James Carson's estate equally among all three daughters. Sandra had sat with her father on those visits and guided his hand. James Carson, on those particular days, was not having good days. His medication levels were being adjusted. His cognition was significantly compromised. He signed where he was told to sign. He may not have fully understood what he was signing. He may not have had the capacity to fully understand. And Sandra knew that. She had been counting on it. James Carson passed away on a Friday morning in February 2020. He was 69 years old. He passed in his own bedroom, in the yellow house on the south side of Atlanta, with Olivia beside him. She had been sleeping in the chair next to his bed for the last several nights, unwilling to be far. She was there when his breathing changed. She was there when it slowed. She held his hand and said everything she needed to say and some things she had been saving for a long time. When it was over, she sat with him for a while in the quiet of the room, just the two of them and the morning light coming through the curtains he had hung himself 30 years ago. Then she picked up her phone and called Sandra. Her voice was steady. She said, "He's gone." Sandra said she would be on the next flight. The funeral was the following Thursday at the church on Campbellton Road. The pews were full. People came from every part of James Carson's life, co-workers, neighbors, church members who had known him for decades, men he had worked with who wore their best suits and sat with their hands folded and their eyes wet. Olivia organized most of it. She selected the hymns. She coordinated with the pastor. She made sure the repast was arranged, that there was enough food, that the people who drove long distances had somewhere to sit and be received properly. Sandra and Tanya stood at the front of the church receiving condolences in their black dresses, composed and gracious and present in the way that people are present at funerals when the cameras are on. Olivia moved through the day like water, everywhere she needed to be, making everything work, grieving privately because there was too much to do to grieve publicly. That was the last day of the life she had known. She did not know that yet. But it was. 72 hours after the funeral, Sandra called a meeting. Olivia arrived at the yellow house, her home, the place she had lived and worked and given herself to for 3 years, to find Sandra and Tanya already seated at the kitchen table. The table had papers on it. Sandra was wearing reading glasses Olivia had never seen on her before. The air in the room was different. Not the air of sisters grieving together. Something else. Something that had been arranged. Olivia set her keys on the counter and looked at the table and then looked at Sandra and said, "What is this?" Sandra said, "Sit down, Olivia." And Olivia, because she was Olivia, sat down. Sandra explained that she and Tanya had been in contact with an estate attorney. She said that the estate needed to be processed through probate and that they had retained counsel to manage the process. She said the will had already been filed. She slid a document across the table. Olivia picked it up. She read it slowly. According to that document, James Carson's estate, the house, the savings account, the investment portfolio, was to be divided equally among his 3 daughters, 1/3 each. There was no special provision. There was no acknowledgement of anything. 3 equal parts, as though the last 3 years had been lived identically by all of them. As though all 3 of them had been in that bedroom every night. As though all 3 of them had learned his medication schedule and driven him to Emory and held his hand through the fear. 3 equal thirds. Olivia set the document down on the table. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "This is not Dad's will." Sandra said, "This is the legal document, Olivia. It has been filed with the probate court." Olivia said, "Who is the attorney?" Sandra gave her a name. It was not Walter Gaines. Olivia said, "What about Walter?" Sandra said, "Walter is semi-retired. He referred us to someone else." Olivia said, "Walter prepared Dad's will. I need to speak to Walter." Sandra said, "The will that has been filed is the current and valid document. That is what the estate requires us to work with." Olivia looked at Tanya. Tanya was looking at the table. Olivia said her name. Tanya looked up slowly. There was something in her face, not quite guilt, not quite resolve, something in between that was worse than either one alone, because it meant she knew exactly what was happening and had decided to go along with it anyway. Olivia said, "Tanya, did you know about this before today?" Tanya said, "Olivia, it is what it is. Dad is gone. We just need to figure out what comes next." Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are selling the house." It was not a question. Sandra said, "It is an asset. Dividing it equally means liquidating it. You will receive your third of the proceeds." Olivia said, "I live here. This is my home. I have lived here for 3 years." Sandra said, "You were a caregiver, Olivia. We understand that. But caregiving is not the same as ownership. The will is clear." Olivia looked at Sandra for a long time. Sandra held her gaze without flinching. Whatever Sandra had been feeling in the months she spent planning this moment, she had finished feeling it. Now there was only the plan. Olivia stood up. She picked up her keys from the counter. She said, very quietly, the way people speak when they are holding something enormous very carefully, "You will regret this." Sandra said, "We are not trying to hurt you, Olivia. This is just the legal process." Olivia said, "I know what this is." And she walked out of the kitchen, through the living room, past the old armchair and the carpet and the front door she had walked through 10,000 times, and out onto the porch. She stood there for a moment. The oak trees were bare in February. The street was empty and cold. She picked up her bag from the porch floor where she had left it when she arrived, and she walked to her car, and she drove away from the yellow house. She did not know when she would come back. She did not know, in that moment, if she would come back at all. She had nowhere to go. Her apartment in East Atlanta had been given up 3 years ago. Her savings were modest, 3 years of part-time income had steadily reduced the cushion she had once maintained. Her first thought was her cousin, Deneen, who had a place in Decatur. She called her from the parking lot of a gas station on Cleveland Avenue. Deneen answered on the third ring, warm and sympathetic, and said, "Of course, come now, come tonight." Olivia drove to Decatur and slept on Deneen's pull-out couch and was grateful in the quiet, exhausted way of someone who has just absorbed a blow so large they have not yet felt the full weight of it. She helped around Deneen's apartment. She cooked. She kept her things in a neat pile in the corner of the living room. She started making calls to Walter Gaines' office on Cascade Road, leaving messages each time with whoever answered. She called the probate court and asked questions she did not have enough legal knowledge to fully understand the answers to. She searched online for what she could find about contesting a will in Georgia. She was not a lawyer. She was a woman with a part-time job and a pull-out couch and the certainty, bone-deep and unshakable, that what her sisters had done was wrong. 2 weeks into her stay at Deneen's apartment, Deneen's landlord came by for a routine inspection. He saw Olivia's things in the living room. He was not unkind about it, but he was clear, the lease did not permit additional occupants, and he could not make exceptions. Deneen was apologetic and distressed. Olivia told her it was all right. She meant it. She packed her bag, the one with the broken zipper, the one that held a change of clothes and a small Bible and the photograph of her father smiling on a Sunday afternoon, and she left before Deneen had to ask her twice. Because that was Olivia. She would not let her problem become someone else's burden. She called her former coworker from the dental practice, a woman named Brenda who lived in College Park. Brenda said yes without hesitating and meant it the way good people mean things. Olivia stayed on Brenda's couch for 11 days. On the 12th day, Brenda said with genuine pain in her voice that her sister was coming to stay and she only had the one couch and she was so sorry. Olivia told her not to be sorry and left. It was now the middle of March 2020. The Atlanta streets were doing what Atlanta streets do in March, running warm and cool in the same day, the sky shifting between blue and gray, the city moving with its particular restless energy. Olivia Carson was 44 years old, and she had nowhere to sleep. She spent the first night in her car, parked in a lot near a Kroger on Memorial Drive. She reclined the seat and lay in the dark and listened to the traffic and told herself it was temporary. It did not feel temporary. The second night was the same. The third night, the car was towed, she had not noticed the overnight parking restriction signs, and when she came back to the lot in the early morning, the space was empty and the certainty that had been holding her together began, for the first time, to crack. She walked. She walked because there was nothing else to do. She walked toward downtown, where the city was awake at all hours and there were people and lights and the particular safety of not being completely alone. She walked along Peachtree Street because Peachtree Street was the spine of Atlanta, the long, continuous thread running through the city that everyone knew, that could orient you when everything else had stopped making sense. She found a bench near Woodruff Park and sat down. Around her, the city moved. Business people with coffee cups. Delivery drivers. A woman walking a dog. A man on a phone call gesturing with his free hand. And none of them, not a single one, saw Olivia Carson sitting on that bench with a worn-out bag at her feet and 3 years of sacrifice and a stolen inheritance and a father's photograph folded in her pocket. They looked through her the way people look through park benches and bus stops and all the things that have always been there, without curiosity, without recognition, without the simple human acknowledgement that another person is present. That invisibility was the thing she was not prepared for. She had braced herself for difficulty. She had expected hardship. But she had not fully understood what it meant to be unseen. To be present in a city of 6 million people and be looked through as though you had no more substance than a shadow. A man outside a coffee shop told her she could not sit on the steps. A woman on the street moved physically away from her when she tried to ask for directions, a small, instinctive sidestep, the kind people make without even thinking about it, as though proximity to struggle might be contagious. A security guard at a building near Peachtree Center walked toward her with the particular expression of someone who has already decided what they are going to say before they have said it. She gathered her bag and moved before he reached her. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply been visible in a way that made people uncomfortable. She moved. She always moved. Because she had too much dignity to make a scene and no resources to make anything else. She learned the geography of survival quickly, the way people do when they have no choice. She learned which shelters had space on which nights and which ones had requirements she could not meet. She learned which restaurants put their unsold food in unlocked bins at closing time and which ones did not. She learned which parts of Peachtree Street were patrolled at what hours. She learned where the day shelter was, a facility near the Peachtree corridor that opened at 7 in the morning and allowed women to come in, wash up, sit in the warmth, access a phone for limited time. She went there every morning it was open. She used the phone to call Walter Gaines' office. She called 4 times over the first 3 weeks and reached a voicemail each time. She left her name and the name of her father and a number she borrowed from the shelter's front desk for callbacks. She did not hear back. She did not know if Walter was truly semi-retired, as Sandra had said, or if something else had happened, or if the messages were simply not reaching him. She could not find out without resources she did not have. So she kept calling. And she kept surviving. Because survival was what she had, and she intended to use it. She found work in the way that people find work when they have nothing formal to offer, through showing up, through asking, through making herself useful in whatever small ways the morning presented. There was a woman named Miss Gloria who ran a flower stall near the intersection of Peachtree and Baker Street. She arrived at 5:30 every morning with buckets of flowers from the wholesale market and spent 45 minutes arranging her display before her first customers arrived. Olivia had watched her do it for 3 consecutive mornings before she walked over and said, "Can I help you with that?" Miss Gloria looked at her for a moment, taking in the bag, the worn shoes, the particular quality of someone who has been outside for too long, and then said, "You know flowers?" Olivia said, "I know how to work." Miss Gloria handed her a bucket of roses. That was enough. She let Olivia help her every morning in exchange for a few dollars and whatever flowers were left at the end of the day. It was not much. But it was something, and something is not nothing, and Olivia understood that distinction in a way she never had before. There was a man named Clifton who drove a restaurant supply truck and made his early morning deliveries along Peachtree between 5 and 7. He had noticed Olivia on the corner near Miss Gloria's stall a few times and had eventually asked her if she wanted to help him carry boxes into the back entrances of the restaurants on his route. He paid her in cash, small amounts, enough for a meal, and he never asked questions, which was its own kind of kindness. There was a storefront cleaning crew that operated before dawn, moving from block to block along the commercial stretches of Peachtree and the surrounding streets with mops and industrial spray and the particular focused energy of people doing a job that no one will see being done. They were short a person one Tuesday morning, and a woman on the crew who had seen Olivia around told her she could come along if she wanted. She did. She kept her head down and worked harder than anyone else on the crew. The supervisor paid her at the end of the shift and told her to come back the following Tuesday. She came back every Tuesday for 6 weeks. None of it was enough to get her indoors. The math of homelessness in Atlanta, or in any city, is brutally simple: the gap between what you can earn in a day without an address, without a phone, without the formal markers of stability, and what it costs to secure even the most basic housing, is a gap that most people cannot cross from the outside. Olivia understood this. She understood it every night when she counted what she had made and looked at the numbers and felt the gap between them and what she needed, and put her money away carefully in a small zippered pocket inside her bag, and found a place to sleep, and started again in the morning. She slept on the bench in Woodruff Park when the weather allowed. She slept in the doorway of a closed storefront on nights when the rain came sideways. She slept in the day shelter on the nights it operated overnight programs, which was not every night. She slept with her bag under her arm and the photograph of her father in her pocket, and the knowledge, which she held onto with both hands in the darkest hours, that this was not who she was. This was where she was. And those are not the same thing. There were moments when the doubt came in anyway. There were nights she sat against a wall somewhere on Peachtree Street and thought about everything she had given, the apartment, the career hours, the social life she had quietly let go of during those 3 years of caregiving, and felt the particular, suffocating injustice of watching all of it amount to a bench in a park and a bag with a broken zipper. She thought about her father's voice saying, "You are the one who showed up." She thought about Walter Gaines on Cascade Road and the will that said her name. She thought about Sandra's face across the kitchen table, composed and certain, and the document sliding toward her, and the door closing behind her on that February night, and she felt something that was not quite anger. Anger was too hot for what she felt, but something colder and more precise. A certainty. A knowledge that what had been done was wrong, and that wrong things have a way of not staying buried, if the person who knows the truth stays alive long enough to see it come out. She held on to that. She held on to it the way her father had held on to the idea of the foundation, quietly, without fanfare, for a long time, because she believed in what it was going to become. She also held on to something else. She held on to who she was in relation to other people, even now, even here. Because even on the streets of Atlanta, even in the worst of it, Olivia Carson did not stop being Olivia. Miss Gloria's flower stall was near a bus stop where a lot of people waited in the mornings, commuters, early workers, older people making their way across town. Olivia noticed them. She noticed the elderly man who struggled with the step up onto the bus. She started positioning herself near the bus door in the mornings to offer a hand when he arrived. She noticed the young woman who came to the stall every Friday and looked at the flowers for a long time and never bought any, always touched them gently and then put them back, like she was saying goodbye to something. One Friday, Olivia took a small bundle of Miss Gloria's leftover flowers and walked over and handed them to the young woman without saying anything. The woman looked at her. Her eyes went bright with surprise and something that was trying not to be tears. She said, "Why?" Olivia said, "You looked like you needed them." The woman held the flowers and looked at Olivia for a moment and then said, "Are you okay?" And Olivia said, "I'm working on it." And she meant it. That was the thing her sisters had miscalculated. They had looked at Olivia and seen someone without power. Someone who could be moved out of the way cleanly, because she did not make noise and did not fight and did not perform her suffering publicly. They had mistaken her quietness for weakness. They had mistaken her patience for acceptance. They had taken everything she had and locked the door and assumed that was the end of it. But the thing about Olivia, the thing that James Carson had seen, the thing Walter Gaines would see when he finally found her, the thing the streets of Atlanta had tried to break and failed, was that her quietness was not weakness. It was precision. She did not waste energy. She did not scatter herself. She waited for the thing that mattered. And the thing that mattered was coming. She did not know it yet. But it was coming. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment right now with the words, "I'm still here." Let us see who is truly following this story all the way through. Because what comes next, what was waiting in a sealed file on Cascade Road, what a paralegal noticed in a church bulletin, what a man in a suit was about to do, is the part that changes everything. Walter Gaines had not retired. He had stepped back from his full caseload. Yes, he was 71 years old and had been practicing estate law in Atlanta for over 4 decades, and the reduction in hours was his wife's condition for not making the retirement conversation more pointed. But he maintained his office on Cascade Road. He kept his files. He kept his clients. And he kept, in a sealed legal envelope in a hanging file under the name Carson, James Elwood, a complete copy of the will he had drafted and notarized and filed on a July afternoon in 2019, the will James Carson had signed with a clear hand and described in specific, deliberate detail, naming Olivia Carson as the primary beneficiary of his estate. Walter had filed the original with the court on the day it was executed. He had his copy in the file. He had not been contacted by the probate court. He had not been contacted by Sandra or Tanya or their attorney. He had been left out of it entirely, which he would later describe in testimony as the element that concerned him most. When an estate attorney of 20 years is not contacted after the death of a client whose will he holds, that is not an oversight. That is a strategy. The person who found out first was Denise Harmon. Denise had worked alongside Walter Gaines for 11 years, managing his client files, coordinating his calendar, and maintaining the kind of institutional memory that a small legal practice depends on entirely. She was meticulous, attentive, and had a habit of reading the church bulletins that came through the office. Walter was a deacon at a congregation in southwest Atlanta, and the bulletins from neighboring churches were regularly passed along through the community network. On a Sunday in late April 2020, Denise opened a bulletin from the church on Campbellton Road and read the memorial notice for James Elwood Carson, beloved husband, father, and longtime member of the congregation. The notice listed his daughters, Sandra, Tanya, and Olivia. Denise set the bulletin down. She went to the filing cabinet. She pulled the Carson file. She read the will. Then she walked into Walter Gaines' office and placed the bulletin and the will on his desk side by side without saying a word. Walter read both. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Pull up the probate records." Denise already had. She showed him the screen. The will that had been filed in probate court was not his document. The attorney of record was not him. The provisions were entirely different. Walter Gaines looked at the screen for another long moment. Then he said, in the measured tone of a man who has been practicing law for 40 years and has learned to keep his voice even when what he is feeling is not even at all, "Find Olivia Carson." It took 3 weeks. Denise started with the dental practice on Piedmont Avenue where she knew Olivia had worked. A former client of Walter's had mentioned it in passing once, years ago, and Denise had a memory for details. The practice said Olivia had resigned 6 months ago and left no forwarding contact. She called the cousin in Decatur. She found Deneen through the church network, which in the black community of southwest Atlanta is a remarkably efficient information system. Deneen said yes, Olivia had stayed with her briefly but she had left and Deneen did not know where she had gone. Deneen's voice had worry in it that told Denise everything she needed to know about Olivia's current situation without a single direct statement. Denise thanked her and kept looking. She reached Brenda in College Park through a contact at the dental practice. Brenda said the same thing, yes, Olivia had been there, no, she did not know where she was now, and yes, she was worried. Denise reported back to Walter each evening. Walter said, "Keep going." On the 3rd week, Denise spoke to a woman from the church on Campbellton Road who had seen Olivia near the Peachtree Street Day shelter within the past month. Denise called the shelter. The shelter could not give out information about people who used their services. But they could confirm, in general terms, that the facility served women in the Peachtree Corridor area. That was enough. Walter Gaines drove downtown himself on a Thursday afternoon in early May. He wore a suit, because he always wore a suit, and he drove slowly along the Peachtree Corridor and parked and walked. He went to the shelter. He identified himself as an attorney with information relevant to a woman who might be using their services. The staff was cautious but not unhelpful. He was given nothing specific, but someone mentioned, gently, that the women who used the morning program often gathered near the MARTA bus stops along Peachtree in the late afternoon. He walked south. He walked slowly, because he was 71 and because he was looking for someone he had not seen in over 2 years and was not certain he would recognize. He passed the Woodruff Park bench. He passed Miss Gloria's flower stall. Miss Gloria had closed for the day, the buckets empty and stacked, but he noted it. He walked another half block. And then, near a MARTA bus stop on Peachtree just south of Baker Street, he saw a woman sitting on the bench with a worn-out bag beside her, reading a section of newspaper that someone had left. Her hair was different from how he remembered it. Her clothes were not what he would have expected. But something about the way she sat, upright, composed, present in a way that most people on a bench are not, made him stop. He looked at her carefully. Then he said her name. Olivia. She looked up. And the moment she saw his face, she was very still. She said, "Mr. Gaines." He walked over to the bench and sat down beside her. He said, "Olivia. I am so sorry it took me this long to find you." She looked at him for a moment, steady, measuring, still processing the shock of being found by someone who knew her full name and her story and the man she had come from. Then she said, "How did you know?" He said, "Denise found the church bulletin." He paused. Then he said, "Olivia, I have something you need to hear." He told her everything. He sat on that bus stop bench on Peachtree Street in the Atlanta afternoon and told her about the original will, the one James had signed in his office on a July afternoon in 2019 with a steady hand and a clear mind. He told her about the will that had been filed in probate, the different document, the different attorney, the different provisions. He told her that he had pulled the medical records from Emory Healthcare, through the appropriate legal channels, and that those records showed significant cognitive compromise during the period when the second will was executed. He told her that in his professional opinion, formed over 40 years of estate law practice in the state of Georgia, there were strong and viable grounds to challenge the probate filing. He told her he was not charging her a fee. He said, "Your father was my client for 20 years. He was a good man and he was clear about what he wanted. I owe it to him to make sure his wishes are honored." Olivia listened to all of it without interrupting. She had gotten very good at stillness in the months she had spent on these streets. When he finished, she reached into her bag and took out the photograph, her father, smiling on a Sunday afternoon, the yellow house visible in the background, and she looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "He told me the foundation would stand." Walter Gaines looked at the photograph. He said, "Then let us make sure it does." Walter brought in a probate litigation attorney named Marcus Webb to lead the legal challenge in Fulton County Probate Court. Marcus Webb was 43 years old, meticulous, direct, and had a reputation in Atlanta's legal community for being exceptionally effective in cases involving will contests and claims of undue influence. He met with Olivia at Walter's office on Cascade Road. Olivia came directly from the street. She had nowhere to change, nowhere to prepare, and she did not apologize for it. She sat across from Marcus Webb in Walter's office in her donated clothes with her broken zippered bag at her feet and told him everything she knew with the precision and clarity of someone who had been rehearsing the story in her head for months. Marcus asked sharp questions. Olivia answered them all. At the end of the meeting, Marcus looked at Walter and said, "We have a case." Walter said, "I know." Marcus looked at Olivia and said, "This is going to take time. It is going to be difficult. But I believe in what we are doing here." Olivia said, "So do I." The legal process began in June 2020 and would last 9 months. The challenge was filed in Fulton County Probate Court under the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity, specifically, that James Carson had not had the cognitive capacity, at the time the second will was executed, to fully understand and independently approve the document he was signing, and that the document had been procured through the influence of a party with a financial interest in its outcome. Sandra retained a Buckhead litigation attorney named Gregory Ashford, expensive, experienced, and possessed of the kind of loud confidence that fills courtrooms. Tanya appeared at some hearings and not others. She had her own attorney, a quieter and more apologetic presence who seemed, in the opinions of those watching, to be managing the difficult task of representing someone who knew she was on the wrong side. The medical evidence was the center of the case. Marcus Webb obtained the complete medical records from Emory Healthcare for the period during which the second will was executed. James Carson's neurologist, Dr. Patricia Osei, had documented in her clinical notes a significant deterioration in her patient's cognitive function during the fall of 2019. She noted in one entry, entered into the record nearly 3 months before the second will was signed, that Mr. Carson was exhibiting marked difficulty with complex information processing and independent decision-making, consistent with advancing neurological decline. She testified to this in court with the measured precision of a physician who understood the weight of what she was saying and said it anyway, because the clinical record was clear. Dr. Osei had never met James Carson's daughters. She had no stake in the outcome. She simply had the notes. And the notes said what they said. The forensic document examiner hired by Marcus Webb, a specialist named Dr. Carl Britton who had testified in Georgia courts on over 200 occasions, compared the signatures on both wills under analysis. He testified that the signature on the second will showed characteristics consistent with what he described as motor control degradation under duress or cognitive compromise. The pen pressure was uneven in ways that differed significantly from the signature on the first will, the letter formation showed hesitation patterns at multiple points, and the overall signature geometry was inconsistent with the natural signature of a person signing with full intent and capability. He stated that these characteristics were consistent with someone who was either physically compromised, cognitively compromised, or both at the time of signing. Gregory Ashford cross-examined Dr. Britton vigorously. Dr. Britton did not move. Walter Gaines testified about the original will. He brought his file to the stand, the complete file, organized and indexed in the meticulous way he had organized every file for 40 years. He described the afternoon James Carson came to his office in July 2019. He described James's manner, clear-eyed, calm, deliberate. He described the specific language James had used to explain his wishes, the particular care with which James had identified Olivia by name and explained his reasoning. He said James had used the word Olivia repeatedly throughout the meeting, not just as a reference, but as a statement of intent. I want Olivia to have the house. I want Olivia to have the account. Olivia is the one who has been here. Walter said that in 40 years of estate law, he had rarely encountered a client more certain of his own wishes or more coherent in expressing them. He said that James Carson, on that July afternoon, was a man in full possession of his own mind and his own voice. Gregory Ashford cross-examined him on the timeline, on the gap between the original will and the second will, on whether circumstances could have changed, on whether a person had the right to update their estate documents. Walter agreed that a person had every legal right to update their will. He also said that the legal and ethical question before the court was not whether the second will existed, but whether it had been validly executed by a man with the capacity and freedom to make independent decisions. He said he believed the evidence in the record was clear. Gregory Ashford sat down. Olivia testified. She sat in the witness chair in the Fulton County Probate Court in the clothes that Denise Harmon had helped her acquire for the hearings, presentable, simple, nothing that drew attention away from what she was saying. She testified to the conversation with her father in the living room on that July afternoon. She testified to the 3 years of caregiving, the medication schedules, the medical appointments, the nights she slept on the couch to be near him. She testified to the visit Sandra had made in the fall of 2019 and to the fact that she had stepped out of the room during those visits to give her sister privacy with their father. She described the kitchen table meeting after the funeral. She described what she had lost. She spoke steadily and without embellishment because the facts did not need embellishment, they were already more than enough. At one point, Marcus Webb asked her how she had survived in the months following her displacement. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "One day at a time. The same way my father taught me." Gregory Ashford's cross-examination was aggressive in the way that expensive attorneys are aggressive when they know their position is weak, attempting to suggest that Olivia had expected compensation for caregiving and been disappointed, that her account of the July conversation was self-serving, that her assessment of her father's state of mind was colored by grief and financial interest. Olivia answered every question with the same steady, precise clarity she had brought to everything. She did not get angry. She did not get rattled. She simply kept telling the truth. Because she had been keeping it for a long time, and she had gotten very good at holding it carefully. The closing arguments were made on a Tuesday morning in February 2021, almost exactly 1 year after James Carson's passing. Marcus Webb laid out the case in the methodical, thorough way of a man who had built something solid and was not afraid to show it from every angle. He walked through the medical evidence. He walked through the forensic document analysis. He walked through Walter Gaines' testimony and the original will and the July afternoon when a man who knew exactly who he was and what he wanted had sat across from his attorney of 20 years and told him what mattered. He said, James Carson knew what the foundation was. He had spent his life building it and he knew exactly who had helped him tend it. The document before this court is not an expression of James Carson's wishes. It is an erasure of them. And this court has the power and the obligation to restore what was taken. Gregory Ashford argued for the validity of the second will, for the right of any person to update their estate documents, for the lack of definitive proof of incapacity. He was composed and professional and thoroughly outgunned by the evidence in the record. The judge, the Honorable Carolyn James of Fulton County Probate Court, thanked both counsels, indicated she would issue a written ruling, and adjourned the session. The ruling came 11 days later, on a Thursday morning. Olivia sat in the courtroom with Marcus Webb on her left and Walter Gaines in the row directly behind her. She had the photograph in her pocket. She held it through the fabric of her jacket without taking it out, just feeling the edge of it between her fingers the way you hold on to something you cannot afford to put down. Judge Carolyn James entered the courtroom and the room was quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something final is about to be said. The judge adjusted her reading glasses and looked at the papers in front of her and began to read. She read her findings on the question of testamentary capacity. She found, based on the medical record, the forensic document analysis, and the testimony of the treating physician, that James Elwood Carson had not had sufficient cognitive capacity at the time of the execution of the second will to independently understand and approve the document he was signing. She found that the circumstances surrounding the execution of the second will were consistent with the legal definition of undue influence. She declared the second will invalid and of no legal effect. She reinstated the original will executed in the office of Walter Gaines on July 14, 2019, as the valid and controlling expression of James Elwood Carson's testamentary wishes. She ordered the estate to be distributed accordingly, the house, the savings account, and the investment portfolio to Olivia Carson as primary beneficiary, with the specified lesser portions to Sandra and Tanya to be drawn from their shares after the reimbursement of Olivia's legal costs and expenses. She noted for the record that the matter was being referred to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal liability related to the submission of a fraudulent testamentary document. The gavel came down. The sound of it filled the courtroom and then was absorbed by the silence that followed. Olivia sat very still. She did not cry. She did not stand up immediately. She sat with both hands in her lap and breathed, a long, slow, careful breath, the kind you take when you have been holding something for so long that the release of it requires its own deliberate attention. Marcus Webb put a hand on her shoulder. Walter Gaines leaned forward from the row behind her and said quietly, "James would be proud of you." Olivia nodded once. She took the photograph out of her pocket and looked at her father's face, smiling on a Sunday afternoon, the yellow house visible in the corner of the frame, everything exactly as it had always been, and she said, very softly, so that only she could hear it, "The foundation stood, Dad." Across the aisle, Sandra was staring at the table in front of her. Gregory Ashford was already leaning over, speaking in a low, rapid voice that had lost its earlier confidence entirely. Tanya sat completely still with her hands folded in front of her, her face holding an expression that had moved past shock into something quieter and harder to name. Olivia looked at her sisters for a moment. Then she stood, picked up her bag, the worn-out bag with the broken zipper that she had carried every single day since the night they locked the door behind her, and she walked out of the courtroom and into the light of a Thursday morning in Atlanta. The weeks that followed the ruling were full of the procedural work of restoring an estate, paperwork, transfers, court filings, the slow machinery of legal restitution moving at its own pace. Marcus Webb handled it with the same thoroughness he had brought to the litigation. Walter Gaines oversaw every step. Olivia stayed in a transitional housing unit that the day shelter had helped her access, a small room, clean and quiet, with a window that faced east and caught the morning light. She slept in a bed for the first time in months. She lay in the dark that first night in the room and listened to the building settle around her and felt the particular, profound relief of a person who has been holding themselves together under impossible pressure and has finally, been given permission to put something down. The district attorney's office initiated its review of the case 4 weeks after the probate ruling. The investigation focused primarily on Sandra, as the architect of the scheme. The evidence was substantial: the coordination with Preston Howard, the timeline of the visits to James Carson during his period of significant cognitive decline, the financial transactions that had occurred in the estate accounts between the time of James's death and the freezing of the estate during litigation. Transactions that amounted to significant withdrawals made in the name of estate management but never accounted for in any formal filing. Sandra's attorney negotiated. The negotiation resulted in a civil settlement. Sandra agreed to repay every dollar that had moved through the estate accounts outside of the legally sanctioned probate process, plus substantial penalties, plus a portion of the legal costs incurred by the prosecution review. She avoided criminal charges, but the settlement was entered in the public record. The community knew. The church on Campbellton Road knew. The neighbors on the south side of Atlanta knew. The people who had known James Carson for 30 years knew what his daughters had done to each other. And that knowledge, in a community built on the particular moral seriousness of people who have always had to be accountable to each other in the absence of other protections, carried its own consequence. Sandra returned to Savannah. She did not come back to the south side of Atlanta for a very long time. Tanya's role had been assessed during the investigation as secondary. She had signed documents, had been present at the kitchen table meeting, had benefited from the scheme. But the evidence did not establish that she had been the initiator or the primary driver. Her cooperation with the investigation, once it became clear that the alternative was significantly worse, was noted. She was not charged. She did not escape cleanly. Her own share of the estate was reduced to almost nothing after the restitution and penalties were applied, and she carried the weight of what she had done in a way that showed in her face and her manner in the months that followed. She called Olivia once, on a Sunday evening in April, about 6 weeks after the probate ruling. The phone rang and Olivia looked at the screen and felt the full complexity of what it meant to receive a call from the person who had looked at her across a kitchen table and said, "It is what it is," while everything she had was being taken away. She picked up. Tanya said, "I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not calling for that." Olivia said, "Then why are you calling?" There was a pause. Tanya said, "Because I need to say I'm sorry. Out loud. To you. Because you deserve to hear it." Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I hear you, Tanya." Tanya said, "I'm sorry, Olivia. I am truly, deeply sorry." Olivia said, "I know." And then, because she was Olivia, and because she was not someone who held things longer than they needed to be held, she said, "I'm going to need time." Tanya said, "I know. Take whatever you need." Olivia said goodbye and ended the call. She stood in a small room with the east-facing window for a long moment. Then she went to the window and watched the Atlanta evening settle over the city and did not make any decisions about forgiveness, because forgiveness is not a decision that can be made in a moment. It is a long road. And she had just gotten through a very long road. She would take one road at a time. 6 weeks after the probate ruling was finalized and the estate transfer was completed, Olivia Carson drove to the south side of Atlanta. She parked in front of the yellow house. She sat in the car for a moment, looking at it. The oak trees had begun to bud. It was March again, almost exactly a year since she had walked away from here with nothing. The house looked the same from the outside. The same yellow paint, a little faded. The same porch with the 2 wooden chairs. The same front steps her father had repaired himself years ago with concrete and patience. She got out of the car. She walked up the front steps. She put her key in the lock, her own key, returned to her by the court order, and she opened the door. She stepped inside. The house was empty in the way that houses are empty when they have been sitting, that particular stillness, the slight staleness in the air, the way light falls differently without furniture to interrupt it. Some of her father's things were gone. The armchair. The clock by the door. Several items from the kitchen that she would later account for in the civil portion of the proceedings. But the house was still the house. The carpet in the living room was still the same carpet. The kitchen window still faced the backyard. The light still came through it in the morning the same way it always had, laying itself across the counter where her mother's cornbread used to cool. Olivia walked through every room slowly. She walked through the living room and stood where the armchair had been. She walked through the kitchen and put her hand on the counter. She walked down the hall to her father's bedroom and stood in the doorway without going in, because she was not ready to go in yet, and she knew it, and she was finally in a place where she could honor what she was not ready for without forcing herself through it. She came back to the hallway and sat down on the floor with her back against the wall, the same wall she had leaned against as a child, doing homework while her parents talked in the kitchen, the same wall that had absorbed 30 years of a family living their lives in the rooms around it. And she cried. Not the controlled, managed tears of survival, the kind she had learned to allow herself in small doses in the dark of a bench or a doorway or a transitional housing room. She cried the full kind, the kind that comes from somewhere underneath all the survival and the strategy and the steadiness, the kind that has been waiting for safety before it lets itself happen. She cried for her father, for the man who had told her the foundation would stand and had been right about it even after everything. She cried for the 3 years she had given and the years she had spent on the street and the mornings on Miss Gloria's flower stall corner and the nights in doorways and the woman who had moved away from her on the sidewalk and all of it, everything, the whole long terrible year of being invisible in a city she had lived in her whole life. She cried until she was done. And then she dried her face with the back of her hand, looked at the photograph of her father one more time, and stood up. She repainted the yellow house that spring. Not a different color, the same yellow, just fresh, the way the house deserved. She planted a garden in the backyard. Not a large one, a modest patch along the south-facing fence where the light was good. Tomatoes, because her mother had always grown tomatoes. Marigolds, because Miss Gloria had taught her to love flowers in a way she had not expected. She went back to work at a dental practice, a different one, in Buckhead, full-time, with the particular confidence of someone who knows exactly what they are worth and is done accepting anything less. She called Walter Gaines every month to give him an update and to hear his voice. She took Marcus Webb and his assistant to dinner at a restaurant in Midtown Atlanta and sat across the table from them and said, simply, "Thank you." Marcus said he had been honored to be part of it. She believed him. She started volunteering on Saturday mornings at the day shelter near Peachtree Street. The same shelter where she had used the phone to call Walter's office over and over during those months when she did not know if anyone was going to hear her. She showed up at 7 in the morning and helped with intake and sat with women who were where she had been, afraid, invisible, uncertain of the distance between where they were and where they needed to get to. She did not tell them her story right away. She just showed up, the way she had always shown up. She helped with what needed helping. She made sure people felt seen. And sometimes, when someone was having the particular kind of day where nothing felt survivable, she would sit next to them and say, "I know what this feels like." And she meant it in a way that very few people can mean something like that. She kept the worn-out bag. She did not throw it away or store it somewhere out of sight. She kept it on the shelf in the closet of the room that had been her room growing up, and she looked at it sometimes, not with shame but with recognition. That bag had been with her through all of it. It had held the photograph and the Bible and the change of clothes through every morning on Peachtree Street, every shift with Clifton's delivery truck, every session at the flower stall, every night in a doorway, every moment when she had held herself together by sheer will and the knowledge of who she was underneath all the circumstances. It deserved to be kept. She kept it. She kept the photograph on the mantel above the fireplace in the living room. Her father, smiling on a Sunday afternoon, the yellow house in the corner of the frame. She looked at it every morning when she came downstairs. Some mornings she said something to it, not always words, sometimes just a look, a nod, the particular communication that lives between people who know each other so well that language is only one of the options. She put new chairs on the front porch. Different from the original ones, those had been taken, but similar in spirit. She sat in them on Sunday evenings with sweet tea and watched the neighborhood settle into night, the way her father had watched it for 30 years. The oak trees arched over the street and touched each other on the other side. The light came through them in the evenings in a way that had always been beautiful and was still beautiful. Some things hold. Some things remain exactly what they were regardless of what tries to change them. The light through the oak trees was one of them. Olivia Carson was another. And now, as we close out Olivia's story, I want to speak to you directly. Not just about what happened to her, but about what it means for any of us who are watching. Because this story is not just about inheritance. It is not just about probate law in Fulton County, Georgia, or a sealed document on Cascade Road, or two sisters who made a choice they will carry for the rest of their lives. It is about something much closer to home. It is about the people in our families and our communities who show up quietly. The ones who do not announce their sacrifice. The ones who rearrange their own lives to be present for someone who needs them, without expectation, without the need for recognition, without keeping a running account of what they are owed. You probably know someone like that. You may be someone like that. And the question this story asks, the question James Carson answered with a sealed document in a July afternoon in a lawyer's office, is whether the people who show up quietly are seen by the people who matter most. James Carson saw Olivia. He made sure, in the most durable way he knew how, that what she had given would not be swallowed by what others tried to take. He could not prevent the taking. He could not protect her from the year on those streets or the nights in doorways or the mornings at a flower stall in the Atlanta cold. But he made sure the truth was documented. He made sure someone who knew the truth had a copy. And that copy survived everything Sandra and Tanya tried to do to bury it, because the truth has a way of surviving. Not always quickly. Not without cost. But it survives. Greed is impatient. Greed moves fast because it cannot withstand scrutiny. It knows that if it slows down and allows the light in, everything it has built will be seen for what it is. Sandra and Tanya moved quickly after James Carson's death. They were organized. They were prepared. They had spent months planning. And for a year, it looked like they had gotten away with it. Olivia was on the street. The house was theirs. The accounts had been accessed. The plan had worked. Except it had not worked, because the plan was built on the assumption that the truth could be permanently buried, and the truth cannot be permanently buried. Not when someone with 40 years of experience and a sealed file and a paralegal who reads church bulletins is sitting on Cascade Road. Not when the original document has been filed in the appropriate court. Not when the medical records exist and the signatures can be analyzed and the testimony of a treating physician can be entered into the record. Not when Olivia Carson is still alive and still telling the truth. Greed is fast but it is not patient, and patience, in the end, is stronger than anything greed can build. The lesson of this story, the lesson James Carson lived and Olivia Carson proved, is not just about what is meant for you finding its way back, though it will. It is about what you do in the time between the taking and the return. It is about who you remain when everything external has been stripped away and the only thing left is the question of your own character. Olivia Carson on a Peachtree Street bench with a worn-out bag was not less than Olivia Carson in the yellow house on the south side of Atlanta. She was the same person in different circumstances. And because she remained herself, because she kept her dignity in the flower stall, kept her kindness with the young woman who needed flowers, kept her clarity in the courtroom, kept her steadiness through 9 months of legal proceedings that would have broken people with more apparent resources and less actual strength, she was able to receive what was coming when it finally arrived. If she had let the streets take who she was, the sealed document on Cascade Road would have had no one left to come home to. Never look down on someone because of their current situation. You do not know their story. You do not know what they gave or what was taken from them or what they are carrying in a worn-out bag with a broken zipper on a bench in a city that is not seeing them today but will have reason to know their name tomorrow. Life changes in ways no one expects, and the person you dismiss on the street today may be the person who teaches you, through the simple fact of their survival, more about dignity and character than anyone you have ever admired from a comfortable distance. Pain can shape you into something that comfort never could. Rejection can develop in you a kind of strength that ease would never have built. And what is truly meant for you, what carries your name, what was left for you by someone who loved you, what belongs to you in the most fundamental sense, cannot be kept from you forever. No matter how long it takes. No matter who tries to take it. True character is not revealed in comfort. It is revealed in how you treat others when you have power, and in who you remain when you have none. In the end, kindness and patience and integrity will always stand taller than wealth built on betrayal. Sandra and Tanya had the house and the money and the plan and a year of apparent success. Olivia had a broken zippered bag and a photograph and a father who had written down the truth. We know which of those things lasted. If this story moved you, if it made you think about loyalty, about family, about fairness, about your own life and the people in it who show up quietly, drop a comment below right now and tell me what moment hit you the hardest. Tell me what you would have done if you were Olivia on that Atlanta street with nothing but a bag and a photograph. Would you have had the strength to keep going? And if you have ever been pushed out, overlooked, or betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you, know that your story is not over. Not by a long way. Please share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it right now, because the next story we bring you will stay with you just as long as this one has. Take care of yourselves. And remember, what is meant for you will always find its way back.